welcome to the podcast. My name's Charlie, and I can't wait to tell you about this beautiful book called Last Night at the Telegraph Club by Melinda Lau. In the podcast, we're going to tackle this book in 6 sections, so 6 episodes, where each episode focuses on a specific portion of the book. We're going to explore themes including, but not limited to, sexual and queer identity, Chinese American culture in a post-war society, and social expectations. You can expect a thoughtful overview of the book, plenty of commentary from me, and a few discussions with some of my friends in regards to their experiences, coming out stories, and the social pressures of today in relation to our protagonist Lily's experience in the book. I look forward to going on this journey with you all, and I'm excited to get started. So, see you there! Hello friends, and welcome to my podcast. My name is Charlie, and we're going to be talking about Last Night at the Telegraph Club, a book by Melinda Lau, and it focuses on a female protagonist that is coming to terms with her sexuality in a post-World War II America where she is living as a Chinese American and receiving a lot of prejudice, and all the while going through this exploration of sexuality, so to say. So we're going to start at the prologue in this first episode, and we're going to work our way through chapter 9, and then there's like a little section on the main character's mother, Grace, that we're going to review. Then every episode after that is going to work on the other sections. So the book is broken into different sections, and they kind of go along with chunks of time. So that first section is mainly focusing in on our main character Lily and her background, as well as her best friend Shirley and the rest of her family. Now I do want to add just some quick trigger warnings in here that we are going to be talking about LGBTQ plus content, family controversy, and spoilers about the book as a whole in these segments. So if that's something that bothers you, just take note of that. That being said, let's jump right in and we'll talk about the prologue and start to hone in on some themes, including ones about internalized homophobia and racism and cultural whitewashing. So starting out strong in the prologue, we get our first glimpse at a timeline starting in 1950, and it puts us at about July 4th, 1950, where Lily attends the 3rd annual Chinese American Citizens Alliance Independence Day picnic and Miss Chinatown contest. So this opens up introducing us to Lily and looking at these groups of Chinese girls ready for the Miss Chinatown contest, and her making commentary about them looking so American, and basically opening up this scene where she's able to look at a group of women in a judgmental way because of the nature of the contest. However, finds herself in a very uncomfortable situation and is comparing herself to the men that are jeering at the women on stage. And that starts to make her a little bit uncomfortable. And this is where you start to see little bits of that internalized homophobia and her not necessarily being comfortable with her sexuality. And also a little bit of desire. There's this whole section where she is watching a girl try to keep her heels out of the ground because they're standing on the grass and their heels are getting stuck in the dirt. And this girl accidentally pulls her whole foot out of her shoe. And this moment makes Lily incredibly uncomfortable because she feels like she's witnessing a really vulnerable moment where this woman doesn't have her shoe on. Yet the purpose of the competition is to objectify these women while in their bathing suits and everything. So it just is unrealistic that she's having such a conflict, but she's having that conflict because she knows that she has a desire for this girl, and that's really where we start to get into that. The prologue continues, and you see Lily join her friend Shirley to watch the contest, and Shirley is talking about the women on stage in a very blunt way, and it's making Lily still feel that little bit of uncomfortable. And when the competition is over, Shirley actually wants to go up on stage, and you can see here that Shirley is a foil for Lily, where Lily is very internalized and very shy, and Shirley is that more outgoing and definitely more of that standard typical Chinese girl. And that's something we'll get into later in terms of like Lily's parents and Lily feeling that pressure to be a good Chinese girl, because that's something that we have throughout the whole novel, where that concept of good Chinese girl and nationality and that Americanized Chinese, they all come into play because they're all tearing at her personality as well as her sexuality. Now, with that background knowledge from the prologue of her being so uncomfortable, we move into chapter 1, where we start out strong with Lily helping Shirley working at her family restaurant. This is where Shirley tries to get Lily to look at the newspaper ad for the Eastern Pearl, which is the restaurant. And above that ad is an ad for a male impersonator, Tommy Andrews. And that ad catches Lily's attention right away, and it makes her feel a little bit uncomfortable, but she ends up tearing that page out and bringing it home. We later find out that she has done this in the past, where she's seeing this male impersonator and feeling an intense desire for this connection with her sexuality, but she doesn't necessarily realize it yet. We also have a set of lesbians that are sitting in the Eastern Pearl, one of which looks more on the butch side and one of which looks more on the stereotypical femme side. And that makes Lily very curious about their dynamic, and Lily and Shirley make up stories for them, and Shirley thinks that the more masculine looking one is actually a private investigator, because she doesn't think that it makes sense that she would be dressed that way if she wasn't working in that sort of field. So it just kind of goes to set the scene as well as to like what is expected of a feminine woman in the society that they're living in. Now, even though that they are in this big city, they are both part of this very closed Chinese American community, because they are living in Chinatown and everybody knows everybody, and everybody in the town is usually involved or knows about everybody's business. So when moving into chapter 2, and we're going to start talking about sexual identity and desire a little bit more, as well as suppression of self, you just have to like be aware that this is a very small town environment for them, and that can be stifling for growth of any sort for anybody. So they are in this small community. And Lily comes home from the Eastern Pearl in chapter 2 and adds the ad for Tommy Andrews into her collection, pulling out other articles for this Telegraph club, where they have the male impersonators. And this kind of shows that she's definitely aware that she's different, because it's not like she's adding these up onto her walls. In fact, she's actually hiding them, pretty embarrassed, and seems to be internalizing most of those feelings. But she is aware that she is different, and that maybe she isn't supposed to be, or at least she feels like she isn't supposed to be looking at these ads in that way in which she feels such a desire to be there, to see Tommy Andrews, to go to this club and to be part of that community, because she does feel that desire. And even if she doesn't recognize it for her coming to terms with her sexual identity, it definitely is there. I'm actually going to read a quote. This is from page 23. So it's actually the last paragraph of chapter 2, and she has these pictures of the male impersonators, a picture of Katharine Hepburn, and she looks at them all in succession. She couldn't put into words why she had gathered these photos together, but she could feel it in her bones, a hot, restless urge to look, and by looking, to know. And I think this is important because she is internalizing it and she is suppressing herself, but this at least little bit of understanding that she has a desire to look, and that the longer she looks, that she might be able to break out of that suppression. Now, moving on through chapter 3, it actually goes more into that good Chinese girl. So Lily actually goes to the store with her mother. This kind of shows her privilege a little bit because she's coming into the store and it's very clear that the Chinese girl working in the elevator is kind of meant to be like a juxtaposition of Lily. So Lily having the privilege of having parents that are well educated and well employed, and then having this girl who doesn't have parents taking care of her. She's living with her uncle, and it really stood out because there weren't that many Chinese people in the store, and so basically the only other Chinese person that they see on this shopping trip is that young girl in the elevator who has to work in order to live in America the way that she is. So this puts Lily and her mother in a really weird place because they are the only Chinese people on that floor that day, and it makes Lily a little uncomfortable, but she can see that her mom has dressed up and looks nicer than she normally would going to the store. And then her mom picks out a series of really good, respectable, good Chinese girl outfits. And Lily absolutely hates them, getting distracted a little bit by the more trendy suit sets and other things that are more appropriate for people her age. But because her mom is so focused on being that good Chinese girl rather than a good American girl or an Americanized Chinese girl, she's making everything be more on that dull, less noticeable side. And I think that's just because these Chinese American people in this time have been so suppressed and they don't want to stand out because they are still receiving prejudice and hate speech and feeling like they don't belong in America after this post World War II world, and it's making their lives very, very suppressed, and that makes them feel like they need to adhere to the more social norm and not necessarily break out of that box of the good Chinese girl because they want to be viewed as good, respectable people. And I have a quote here from page 30 where she's talking about the suit and her mother, Lily is, and says, even if it was ugly, it declared her investment in respectability. Her mother was a real American wife and mother, not a China doll in the cheongsam, regulated to operating the elevator. A cheongsam is a traditional Chinese dress, if you did not know, that is cited on page 24. However, this does show their desire to be viewed as a standard American family rather than a glorified Chinese family or a stereotypical Chinese family. It's also important to note that while they're in the store, Lily talks about the fact that this is not normally the floor that she would shop on and that her mother is splurging here so that she can look respectful. And she also talks about a time in the past when she had gone shopping with her mom and little brother Eddie. And this time around, Lily had asked for a chemistry set for Christmas. And her mom's response was to ask her if she wanted a doll instead. And then Lily gets angry and says she doesn't want the doll. So the reflection on this in the store just kind of goes back and gives a little history on Lily as a person, and just that she's more interested in practical items, especially ones that help her learn. That's something that is common throughout the book, is that she does want to become some sort of engineer and do a lot of math and is hoping to work for something to do with space. I mean, she wants to build spaceships, and I think that's really cool. Lily has an aunt actually named Judy, and that aunt works for a company that Lily is hoping to work for when she grows up. And I think having that goal and it being so much of a deviation from that good Chinese girl and from what's expected of like a housewife, I think that kind of just shows where Lily is at and how she feels about herself, and just in general wanting to have that basis of knowledge and work in a field where she's respected and can use her brain and is engaged, and she has that good role model of her aunt to go off of. So especially moving into chapter 4, we're gonna meet a couple of Lily's peers in Miss Weiland's class. So Lily is going to be sitting at a table with Shirley, Kathleen, and Will. Now, Will and Shirley are both Chinese, like Lily, but Kathleen is not. She is white. So they get together in these groups to talk about their childhood dreams, what their dream is now, and the steps that they can take to achieve that dream. And so, of course, Shirley says that she wants to be a housewife and she wants to have kids. Will says that he's gonna be a lawyer and get an awesome job. And then Lily has the same dream to an extent as she had when she was a kid, where before she wanted to go to space and now she wants to work on spaceships or work in the programming of those spaceships as a mathematician. So I think that in this moment, Lily is really talking about real, actual dreams that she's feeling, and Shirley is feeling that societal pressure to conform to what social norms are, and Will as well with wanting to be a lawyer so he can provide for his family. And having Kathleen there is perfect because Kathleen actually wants to fly airplanes, and that feels like the rest of the group that's a really unrealistic goal, just like Lily's, to work with spaceships. And they're both kind of that same freeing aspect, like completely freeing yourself from the country, freeing yourself from expectations. So both of Kathleen and Lily's dreams end up kind of being this freeing and like worthwhile goal as opposed to that more social norm. And they do feel a little bit of pressure to conform in that conversation. Shirley actually says something to Kathleen about not being able to get into a college, and Kathleen stands up to Shirley on Lily and Kathleen's behalf about actually being better off at getting into college than Shirley would be. And I think that that's the first time that Lily has really seen someone stand up to Shirley. And in the past, I don't think that necessarily Lily viewed Shirley as like a mean girl, but because of that social expectation being so important to Shirley, and being a good Chinese girl and being a good American Chinese girl and fitting into all of those social norms, I think that this really shows Lily that Shirley is not necessarily going to be able to be her friend for her whole life if she can't accept that Lily is not the same as her. And it just kind of makes her take a step back at first and think about Shirley as a person and not just as a friend that she's grown up with forever. When the class ends, everything breaks up, and Shirley actually asks Lily to come with her to a picnic with Will and some of their other friends, and kind of coerces her into coming by saying that they're going to have a great time and saying it wouldn't be the same without her. And even though she doesn't really want to go, Lily does agree. And that ends up being an issue, not in the next chapter, chapter 5, but in chapter 6. So we move on to chapter 5, and this is just Lily walking home for the day, and she has a little bit of extra time, so she goes into the market and is looking through the books and actually comes across a couple of really, really crazy novels. And this is like very, very common to the time, where there was these very sensualized novels for all sorts. Like, it's not just lesbian novels, but this one that she comes across is called Strange Season, and it's these two women on the cover who just look completely undone and definitely provocative. And so Lily is drawn to this, and so she starts reading this book in between the stacks and trying to just like hide from the people at the front of the store because she's embarrassed, because this book is about two girls loving each other. And I mean, these books at the time, they don't end well, and there are always these awful lessons where it's like, oh, you did all of these lesbian acts and now you're going to be heavily punished for them at the end of the book. And that's just the nature of the time. There's a lot of books like that from that time period, but those books, while they did serve purposes for other people, they definitely gave a sense of being able to see yourself in a situation and really a reality, like an understanding of self, to be able to see yourself portrayed in a story. Even if you didn't have a good ending, there was so much of the in-between that was important for the people of the queer community back then to be able to see themselves represented like that in such a way that they could just find it at the regular corner store. And the chapter ends with Lily going home and ending the night with touching herself while thinking about these scenes from this book. And I think that goes a lot to say how fast her understanding of her own desires and sexual identity actually is coming into play. It's a quick chapter, but it gives us just a little bit of insight into the sexual identity portion of her story. But moving through with chapter 6, that's when Lily heads to that picnic with Shirley and Will. And Hanson and Flora, the two other friends that Shirley had promised would be there, actually don't come, and Will's older brother Calvin comes. So it ends up feeling a lot like a double date, where Lily is on a date with Will and Shirley is on a date with his older brother Calvin. And this is a weird scene because they're actually going to a building where they don't know, but it's Chinese American Democratic Youth League, and it seems innocent enough. They go, they have this picnic. It seems like they have a good time. Lily is looking at Shirley and can definitely tell that she has her eye on Calvin, and Shirley doesn't admit to it or doesn't talk about it, and I think Lily feels like that's a little odd for Shirley. And at the end, she ends up having a little bit of a fight with Shirley because Shirley is trying to get Lily to admit that she likes Will, or at least get her to act a little bit more nice towards Will so that she can finally get a boyfriend. And Lily wants to say that she doesn't want a boyfriend, but instead gets off by saying that her parents won't let her have a boyfriend until she goes to college. And I think that for her is her best way of being able to shut Shirley down without having to give anything up. And it's a really good excuse, and she's going to be able to use that throughout this whole time of her life when she is questioning her sexuality. And it is normal for people her age to have a significant other. I mean, especially reading through these things and myself being a person that's part of the queer community, I went through a lot of similar things, but on a very different level because, one, I don't have the Chinese American nationality issues and concerns that Lily has to go through, but I also don't have that 1950s attitude towards sexuality and gender identity and all of those things. So we live in a time where we're lucky to be able to, for the most part, talk about ourselves and talk about our feelings and who we love and who we want to be. And for Lily, she can't talk about it at all to anybody. And at this point, she just feels wrong and confused and can't figure out exactly what she wants because there is no social norm for what she wants. So she has nothing to follow, no guidelines. And nowadays, I feel like, especially kids growing up now, there's a lot of representation, even through small towns. I live in a pretty small town, and I know for a fact that there's a lot of queer couples in town because I know quite a few of them. And that's something that's generally accepted, especially with social media and the progression in the last couple of years. I feel like we've gotten really able to speak out about those issues and those things that we go through and about being treated fairly and equally and being able to love who we want to love. And poor Lily is stuck in this time when she just can't. And so even though Shirley's her best friend, she can't even talk to her best friend. Now, chapter 7 is where we kind of get into the fun stuff. So it starts off with Will actually kind of cornering Lily and asking her to the school dance. And she wants it to be as friends. He kind of notes that they could go out with friends to, but that he prefers that it be a date because everyone else in the group going is going with a date. And so Lily is having this panic attack moment where she really doesn't want to answer him because she definitely doesn't want to be his date, but also he's her friend. They grew up together. She's going to have all of this social pressure, and Shirley's going to be angry with her, and all of these things are going through her head, but she really doesn't want to say yes, and she doesn't want to hurt his feelings, and so she just bolts. She says she has to go, and she runs off into the bathroom and ends up dropping her bag on the floor as soon as Kathleen walks in. And Kathleen finds her spilled backpack and picks up the ad for Tommy Andrews, the male impersonator that Shirley had cut out at the Eastern Pearl. And that sparks a whole bit of confusion between Lily and Kathleen, where Kathleen can't feel super comfortable talking about it right away, but definitely is holding on to this ad, and Lily is feeling uncomfortable that Kathleen is holding on to this ad and says that she was just using it as a bookmark. And it seems like the moment's going to pass, but Kathleen ends up telling Lily that she's actually seen Tommy Andrews before with her friend and has gone to the Telegraph Club before. And this is something that kind of blows Lily's mind because, one, they're definitely not old enough to go to this club, and they would definitely have to sneak in. They'd have to sneak out of their parents' houses and have the availability to do that. And especially with that whole good Chinese girl concept of Lily needing to be the best person that she can be because of her nationality, or her heritage, her Chinese heritage, and the fact that she is in America and she needs to adhere to that expectation. She just doesn't consider going to the club. She's just cutting out these ads. So to find somebody who's actually been kind of throws her for a loop where she just hadn't even considered going to the show as a possibility. And then on top of that, of course, Kathleen's asking her why she's there, and Will starts knocking on the door, and Kathleen ends up dispelling Will by saying that she's having menstrual problems. And of course, that's like the go-to excuse. I thought that was interesting that was put in here because it's such a normal go-to excuse for girls. It feels sometimes like the only socially acceptable excuse, even now. And when you're not feeling good, or you're frustrated, or you're getting angry, it's the first thing that you get that gets blamed on. It's like, okay, well, you must be on your period right now. So it's just one of those things. And in this moment, it works. And while Lily thinks that she should be embarrassed, she's actually really grateful that Kathleen has used this excuse. And it kind of gives them a little bit of a secret, a little bit of a share, because she has said to Kathleen that she doesn't really want to go with him and didn't want to give him an answer. And Kathleen gives her a way out. And I think that makes her feel like Kathleen is a very safe person for her, because had it been Shirley, her best friend since childhood, the person she's grown up with and should be able to trust, Shirley would have made her answer, and Shirley would have made her answer yes. So she would have felt that social pressure. And so to have it be Kathleen is perfect in this moment, and it's exactly what Lily needs in order to be able to feel safe with Kathleen. And this chapter ends with Kath actually asking Lily to call her Kath instead of Kathleen. And I think that that's just such an amazing turn of events, because it is Kathleen going on a whim and trusting Lily with her identity in a way. It's just a little nickname, but my friends call me Kath. And that's a level of understanding and a level of vulnerability that she shows to Lily, because she has seen Lily's vulnerability in coming across that ad out of her bag, and kind of just giving her that extra boost of confidence that she can trust Kathleen. And I think that that's just a perfect place, and exactly what Lily needs to move forward and break through this suppression of self and questionable sexual identity in order to understand herself. And then as soon as chapter 8 opens, we get Shirley very upset with Lily for saying no or not answering Will. And immediately that juxtaposition of Kathleen being a very understanding friend and then Shirley being that social pressure. But moving on, we end up getting the insight that Lily and Kath have been walking home together. And so Lily finds Kath at the end of the day after her fight with Shirley, and they have a little bit of extra time. So Lily asks to go get ice cream, and Kath ends up taking Lily to a gelato place because Kath's Italian. And Lily has only really had the ice cream that's in Chinatown. So for her, like, her favorite ice cream is ginger ice cream. And they make a future date to go to the Chinatown shop where her favorite ginger ice cream is at a later time, since they're going to Kath's ice cream shop this time. So they get their ice cream and they go sit in the park and they're chatting, and they see a group of lesbians, I think, walk through, and it makes them pay so much attention. And the fact that they're both looking at these people and paying attention, Lily is noticing Kath's attention on them, and I think Kath is noticing Lily's attention on them, and that kind of just gives them this like base of understanding for each other, even if they're not talking about it. And I think moments like this are important, especially in adolescence, no matter what time period or what you're going through, because that's something that I had a couple of understanding friends in high school, but for the most part, the most understanding I felt was with other people that felt the same as me, even if it wasn't someone that I was going to be in a relationship with. But just to be able to sit with someone and know that you both understood each other and really feel comfortable being in your skin around that person. And then there's other people that you just don't feel comfortable like that. So it is so important to have that person or multiple people that you can feel like you can be yourself around and not feel judged for watching a group of women walk by that you feel like looking at. And Lily in this moment talks a little bit about looking at Kath and wondering if they're going to talk about the Telegraph Club. And I think that's a good moment of real insight that Lily does understand the significance of the fact that Kath has been there and is curious rather than judgmental. And that's the difference between Lily and Shirley, where Lily is open to conversations about it, and this is the only time that she's going to really be able to have those conversations because she doesn't have those supportive friends. Now we get to chapter 9, though, and this is probably one of the more heavy chapters, in my opinion. So when Lily goes home, she comes home early and finds both of her parents home, which is very unusual. And her dad has come home because he's been, I believe, suspended from his position for the moment pending investigation because he had a client, and that client was actually Calvin from the picnic that Lily had gone to, and he's suspected of being a communist. And so her father's managers basically interrogated him about this client Calvin as being a communist, and he didn't give them any information, and they wanted him to give them information. So this was a complicated part because basically her father got his papers taken away. So even though he's a legal American citizen, he, without papers, doesn't act like, isn't one. So if he got arrested, if anything happened, without papers to prove he's an American citizen, they could send him away. And that's something that they live in fear of on a regular basis. All of these Chinese American people that are living in America, and especially with all of the post-war things going on, it just seems as though they really need to keep their heads down. And when he didn't do what they asked him to, I mean, he was trying to follow HIPAA. He was trying to not talk about it's basically a customer, a client, a patient of his, that you don't talk about those things with other people. That's supposed to be patient-doctor confidentiality. And So he doesn't say anything, and because of this, they start to believe that her dad is a communist, and so he's lost his papers, and the government is basically on the alert for him and his family. So anything that Lily does is going to be subject to a lot more judgment because of this change, and that makes her feel incredibly anxious and makes her really worried. And now she's hearing from her parents that Calvin might be a communist, and she knows that Shirley loves Calvin, and she's worried for Shirley, and she's worried for Will because Will is his little brother, and if they're suspected of being communists, then like her whole social life is going to be torn apart. And it's one of those heavy realizations in this book that really makes you come at it from a culture perspective, and that racism and whitewashing and all of those things that come along with being of different ethnicities to the people around you. And it's something that Lily will encounter throughout her explorations with her queer identity as well, and it's going to just be important as a theme throughout the whole book. So especially in this moment where it's just really setting the scene for them being kind of on thin ice, and not being able to act normally. They're going to have to be super cautious in all of their interactions in order to not attract attention to themselves. And most people in the world just have never had to deal with that. I've never really had to deal with that. In some scenarios, I have felt that way about my queer identity, and I do think that that can be a problem in that as well, but it's becoming so much more socially acceptable, and I am a person, I am a white person, and I have never really had to deal with any ethnic issues or cultural issues growing up, because I have lived here, grown up here, and my family lives here, and I look just like everybody else here. And so for Lily, having to deal with coming to terms with her sexual identity, as well as knowing that as a Chinese American, she's held to a different standard, I think that that's something that has a big lasting impact on Lily's life as a whole. Now, in our last section of the day, we're talking about Grace, and this is Lily's mother. And she was already living in America, was not first generation here, and she met Grace's father at church while she was a nursing student, and was introduced to Joseph, and he had just arrived from China, but he actually even spoke Mandarin, whereas Grace and a lot of the Chinese American community spoke Cantonese. So that already sets Lily's father apart from the norm for that Chinese American community. And those that speak Mandarin versus speaking Cantonese are considered to be even less Americanized, so to say. And so that's just another layer of judgment. Even within the Chinese community that they're living in, they are still going through judgment based off of what language that they speak and where in China they came from. So it's judgment all around here. And so when Grace meets Joseph, and you can see a couple of points where Grace is actually being that more judgmental person, where she's looking at Joseph and he's talking about his father and imagining a Mandarin wearing a round cap and sporting a long beard, but then she chastises herself because he probably wore modern suits just like Joseph. That's on page 75. And I think that that's just another layer of detail of you're still getting judged even in your own community. But Grace goes on and talks about her family owning a store and thinks about how the store had always bored her, and so she's going to nursing, and basically she's asking Joseph whether he's planning on going back to China after he finishes his training as a doctor. And at this moment in time, he's saying that, of course, because China needs those Western trained doctors and engineers and architects and nurses too. basically noting that they're in a difficult situation in China and that they should help out their home country. And because Grace isn't identifying with China as her home country at this time, I think that she has a little bit of confusion in trying to understand Joseph at first. And obviously they get through it, but it just shows the difference even within the community, and especially for Lily, how she's coming from two different sides, where her mom is that more Americanized Chinese, where she really feels like she needs to comply to those American social norms and statuses, and her dad, who feels a little less strongly about that, but does feel very strongly about making sure that they don't get kicked out of the country because of doing something incorrectly. So he's definitely worried about his status as an American citizen, but in a different way than her mother is worried, because her mother, rather than being worried about status as being able to stay in the country, she's more worried about status in terms of how they're seen as an American family, as an Americanized Chinese family, rather than Joseph, who's just more worried about how they're viewed from a government standpoint. Or at least that's how it seems to me. And Grace herself is thinking about Joseph as a suitor in general, because she notes here that Chinese men were more desperate because there were more Chinese American men than Chinese American women in America. So that the dating pool seemed desperate and wasn't really something that she was interested in. And she does have this moment where she imagines a little bit of patriotism for China and is imagining Dr. Joseph walking through a Chinese hospital and herself the nurse. And I think that that's interesting because especially she's never really had this sense of patriotism, but in this moment it seems like Joseph has made her wonder about that, and maybe that's because he says he's going to go back to China or is planning to go back to China afterwards, and maybe she herself is considering it. But after, you find this out later, after he serves in the war, he ends up staying here because he's granted citizenship, and the war was kind of devastating, so they weren't really able to go back home in the way that they felt like home to China in the way that Joseph had wanted to in the beginning. Wow, now that was a lot to unpack, but that's part 1 of Last Night at the Telegraph Club. We're going to be talking about part 2, which is called I Enjoy Being a Girl, and it focuses on October through November of 1954. So we're going to be talking about that next time, but for now, I just wanted to touch base on how I thought that this first section, part 1, had made me feel about Lily as a character. So I think that for me, she does embody a little bit of my childhood and my growing up experience as well, because she is part of the queer community, but doesn't necessarily know it or isn't coming to terms with it yet. And I think that's something that anyone who has gone through something like that can really identify with. And also just feeling really bad for her as a character because of her heritage and her American Chinese nationality, how that conflicts, and how sensitive her situation is, really, because she's not necessarily secure and safe. And I think that that's something that, while I've personally never had that experience, that there are a lot of people that could really recognize and relate to that and really reflect on how that made them feel about their own situations and how America has even grown or not grown as a country. So I think that some important topics to touch upon in this is just evaluating social pressure. So for Lily, the social pressure to conform, and not just to the regular societal expectations of women, but societal expectations of a good Chinese woman or a good Chinese girl and a Chinese American, and trying to be a good American while also being a good Chinese girl, and having those not necessarily coincide with each other, and just relating that to now. And so right now we have social pressure all the time. It's not always about that same social norm the way that it was with Lily, but like I can say that I feel an immense amount of social pressure to conform to things such as like having children or getting married or having a house or anything like that. There's social pressure all around us in the world that we live in now, just like there was for Lily back then. And so I think that makes it really relatable as a book, especially a book for young adults, to be able to see those same societal problems and like limitations, and how Lily moves past them can help young adult readers of now be able to move past some of those social pressures that they're feeling in our lives today. And so on the topic of queer community, though, I think that we've come leaps and bounds away from what Lily has to experience in the terms of support, a sense of community, and also just representation in general, and with social media and phones and photos and the way that everything has evolved in the way that it has. I think that more than ever, we've been able to have proper representation for the youth of today. And I think that maybe even, I hope in a couple of years, that this book will be a little hard to understand in the sense of how Lily's having a struggle with the queer identity. At least like you'd hope so, that we could just grow a little bit past that so it didn't feel like something that you had to worry about, and that maybe one day that can look a little bit look a little bit more up instead of so bleak. So in general, just being able to wrap up that sense of queer community for Lily, and in the future episodes she's gonna be able to find a better sense of community, and that's going to really help her embrace her queer identity and also be able to cope with some of that social pressure and also not cope. So we'll go through that. Also just wanting to touch on desire as a whole, desire especially through adolescence and just growing up, because I mean, growing up is hard no matter who you are, whether you're part of the queer community, whether you are a different ethnicity than those around you, whether you're a minority or anything. So anything that can make you different is part of growing up, and everyone is different from every other person. So this just kind of encapsulates that YA genre of showing just how adolescence is pretty much similar for everybody, even though we all go through different things, that it makes it really relatable, especially for that YA audience, this first understanding of desire and not necessarily knowing what to do with it yet, and being able to move through that, whether it's within a queer relationship or not. So I think that that's really important that was included, and I think that it's something that I'm looking forward to breaching more seriously through the next couple of episodes. However, I'm going to wrap this one up here, and I thank you for listening. This one's a little bit of a long one, but this is the longest chunk of the book that we have to review, so the next one should be a little bit shorter. I am hoping to make the sections just a little bit more condensed and be able to touch on some more real life topics and be able to pull in real life experiences from the environment that I'm in and the people that I'm around, in order to kind of just make some references to now versus in the book and ask about people's experiences. So if you're looking forward to listening to other people's experiences within the queer community and social pressure and such like that, stay tuned, and I'll see you in the next episode.